Picture this. You're at a crowded beach. Someone starts struggling in the water. 50 people are close enough to hear them. And here's the strange part. The more people around, the less likely any single one of them jumps in. That sounds backwards. It should be the opposite. But the real answer is far stranger than logic would suggest. Your brain is not built to help a stranger in a crowd. It's built to watch the crowd first. Before you act, you check the faces around you. Are they alarmed? Are they calm? If everyone looks calm, your brain quietly downgrades the emergency. This isn't a character flaw, it's wiring. And it goes back further than you think. In March of 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York. Newspaper reports at the time claimed dozens of neighbors heard her cries and did nothing. That account turned out to be exaggerated, and later journalism corrected much of it. But the story still did something important. It sent two psychologists chasing a question nobody had studied properly before. Why do people freeze when someone needs help, especially when others are watching too? Those psychologists were Darley and Bibb Latane. In 1968, they ran an experiment that would define this entire field. Participants sat alone in a room, believing they were part of a group discussion over an intercom. One voice on the intercom suddenly appeared to have a seizure and called for help. Here's what they found. When a participant believed they were the only listener, they helped almost immediately, nearly every time. But when they believed 4 other people were also listening, the response collapsed. Fewer than a third rushed to help at all, and the ones who did waited far longer to act. Darley and Latane gave this a name, diffusion of responsibility. When you're the only witness, the weight of the emergency lands entirely on you. There's nowhere for that weight to go, but at a crowd, and something shifts in your mind without your permission. You start to think, someone else will handle it. Surely someone already called for help. Surely I'm not the only one who noticed. The responsibility doesn't disappear. It just gets divided into smaller and smaller pieces until each piece feels light enough to ignore. Think about how strange that math actually is. Logically, more witnesses should mean more hands available to help, more people who could call for an ambulance, more people who could physically step in. Instead, the opposite happens almost every time it's tested. 10 witnesses don't add up to 10 times the chance of help. They add up to a fraction of what one witness alone would provide. The crowd doesn't multiply courage, it divides it. Why would evolution build something so seemingly self-defeating? The answer isn't that your brain is broken, it's that your brain is running an old rule in a new environment. There's a second force working alongside this one. Psychologists call it pluralistic ignorance. Have you ever been in a room where something felt off but nobody said anything, so you assumed you were the only one who noticed? That's this effect in action. Everyone is scanning everyone else's face for a reaction. Everyone else is doing the exact same thing. So the room stays calm on the surface, even while every single person is quietly unsettled underneath. A crowd of worried people can look from the outside like a crowd of people who see nothing wrong at all. There's a name for this too. Social psychologists call it informational social influence. When a situation is unclear, you don't just look inward for the answer. You look outward at everyone else and borrow their read of reality instead of trusting your own. It's efficient most of the time. It's also exactly what fails you in a genuine emergency, because everyone else is borrowing from you at the same moment you're borrowing from them. Think about your own ancestors for a moment. For most of human history, you didn't live around strangers. You lived in small bands, maybe 50 people, almost all of them family or people you'd known your whole life. In that world, watching the group for social cues wasn't a flaw, it was survival. If the group froze, there was usually a reason, a predator, a threat you hadn't spotted yet. Trusting the collective red of the room kept you alive more often than trusting your own gut. Anthropologists studying small foraging societies today still see this pattern. Decisions about danger get made collectively, by reading the group, not individually, by reading the evidence alone. Your brain never got the memo that the world changed. It still runs that ancient program in elevators, in office buildings, on crowded sidewalks, surrounded by people who share none of your history and none of your blood. Here's what makes it worse in the modern world specifically. Your ancestors' groups were small enough that everyone could actually see everyone else's face clearly. A flicker of fear on one person's face was visible information to the whole band. Now picture a subway platform or a crowded street or a packed stadium. Hundreds of faces, most of them turned away, most of them impossible to read at any real distance. The very cue your brain evolved to rely on, the visible reaction of the group, becomes unreadable noise the moment the group gets large enough. Your instincts don't shut off, they just start working with worse and worse information. So what actually breaks the freeze? Researchers have found a few things that reliably work. Direct eye contact is one. If someone in a group looks straight at you and says, "You, in the red jacket, call an ambulance," the diffusion collapses instantly. Responsibility stops being shared and becomes personal again. That's why safety trainers now teach people to give exact individual instructions during an emergency, rather than shouting for help into an undefined crowd. Familiarity is another factor. Studies have shown that when bystanders know each other, even slightly, helping rates climb back up sharply. Strangers diffuse responsibility onto each other easily. Friends don't, because the social cost of doing nothing in front of someone you know is much higher than doing nothing in front of a stranger you'll never see again. And here's something more recent. In 2019, a researcher named Richard Philpott led a study that didn't rely on staged experiments at all. His team examined real security camera footage of actual public conflicts across multiple countries, hundreds of incidents pulled from ordinary streets rather than laboratories. What they found challenged decades of assumption. In real-world footage, bystanders intervened far more often than the original lab experiments predicted, and larger crowds sometimes meant more helpers stepped in, not fewer. Why the difference? Part of the answer is that real streets aren't sealed rooms with an intercom and a scripted seizure. Real conflict is visible, loud, and unambiguous in a way a staged experiment rarely captures. Ambiguity, it turns out, is the real fuel behind the freeze, not crowd size by itself. When something is obviously, undeniably an emergency, the diffusion weakens on its own. When something is unclear, a stumble that might be nothing, a raised voice that might be a joke, the crowd effect takes over completely. In a crowd of genuine strangers watching a real, ambiguous event unfold, someone almost always breaks the freeze first. And once one person acts, others follow within seconds. The freeze isn't permanent. It's just waiting for a single crack. That single crack matters more than anything else in this whole story. You are far more likely to help if you've simply seen someone else help first. One person moving is often all it takes to dissolve the diffusion for everyone else nearby. The first mover pays the highest cost, in social risk, in uncertainty, in the fear of overreacting to nothing. Everyone after them pays almost nothing at all. They're not deciding whether to help anymore. They're just joining something that's already begun, and joining is always easier than starting. This is why so much of emergency training now focuses less on convincing people that emergencies matter and more on manufacturing that first crack artificially. Lifeguards are trained to move immediately and visibly, not because their first few seconds always save a life, but because their visible motion permits every other person on the beach to act too. A single confident voice in a crowd can undo an entire room's hesitation in under a second, simply by giving everyone else permission to stop watching each other and start watching the actual problem. Now think about your own life, away from beaches and sidewalks. This isn't only about emergencies. It shows up in a group chat where something feels wrong and everyone waits for someone else to say it. It shows up in a meeting where a bad idea sails through because nobody wants to be the one who objects first. It shows up when you see a coworker struggling and assume their manager must already know. It shows up online too, in comment sections full of people who privately disagree with a pile-on but stay silent because speaking up first feels like standing alone in front of a crowd. Every one of these moments runs on the exact same ancient circuitry as a crowd on a beach. Have you ever left a voice memo unsent because you assumed someone else would raise the concern? Have you ever noticed a mistake in a document that dozens of people had already seen and said nothing, assuming it must be fine since nobody else flagged it? That's diffusion of responsibility, running quietly through an ordinary Tuesday with nothing dramatic about it at all. It doesn't need sirens or emergenal